Oh, hi there. It's Halloween time, so let's make a fish. A shark, to be correct. But what does a fish have to do with Halloween? Well, that's precisely the point. Fishes never really get their Halloween, so I thought I might as well give them one. And the second reason is because I have been trying to learn sculpting and I've been successful at doing a snake, which has really no arms and legs. And a shark seemed to be a good way to upgrade to that. I mean, it has fins now. It's a bit like evolution. Also, a huge shout out to Artistic Spaz 37244 for reminding me that there's a thing called Halloween. Anyway, the keen among you might have noticed that this does not look like a shark. That's what I thought to myself when I was making it, because I made it a bit chubbier than it should be. So I decided to make it look like a killer whale instead. This pretty much defeats the purpose of the diorama, because technically a whale is not a fish, but oh well. Once I have a decent shape of the fish, I have given it a nice coat of primer. And on it I will scribble some of the patterns that's iconic with a killer whale. Interestingly, the patterns on the underbelly of a killer whale, along with its private parts, make it look like a scared ghost. Which coincidentally fits into the Halloween theme. Another less interesting thing is that I'm trying to do painting using masking tape. See, I'm not really confident that my painting skills would make accurate straight lines, so I thought of using masking tape. Essentially, I've got the pattern onto the tape and then I will lay it onto my cutting mat. After that, I'll simply cut out the shape and then stick it onto the whale fish. Once I've masked everything out, I will simply spray paint it with some glossy black paint. Now, I made my first mistake here. I thought that if I left the paint to dry, it might be difficult to peel off the masking tape. So I peeled it off a bit early, but it also meant that I left a massive fingerprint on it. Nonetheless, I decided to keep it, hoping that some aliens in the future might find that I was here. All in all, it's a decent looking killer whale, and I will touch up the tail fin later on. With the killer whale fish completed, let's make a farmhouse. But again, what does a farmhouse have to do with a killer whale fish? Nothing really, but a farmhouse and pumpkins go really well together as a Halloween theme, and I thought of mixing them together. The idea would be that the farmhouse would be fully submerged in water, and it's not just a flooded old farmhouse. I want to try to make it look like people actually live underwater, farming and doing their own things and doing pretty much what a normal person would do. To achieve that, I will create the whole house out of polymer clay. I'll be trying out a new clay, the Super Sculpey Living Doll polymer clay, and apparently it's not really a toy. Anyway, I have rolled out a sufficiently thick layer of polymer clay using a pasta machine, and then I'll wrap it around the wooden core. Now, some of you might be thinking Living Doll clay is for characters, and to that I say, but of course. After I've created a basic structure of the house, I will use some sculpting tools and create some recesses for windows and doors to come along. I'll then add some strands of polymer clay to accentuate the tiny recesses. After that, this time around I try to give some hinges to the door and use the pin to create some of the bolts. Once that's done, instead of jewelry wire like I usually do, I give it some proper doorknobs. I know it doesn't exactly look like one, but this is an underwater house, so things are a little different. Once the walls are completed, let's work on the roof. And to make the roof, I thought of making it look like a thatch roof instead of a tiled or shingled roof. To make the roof look like straw or hay, I'll be using a wire tool and simply scrape the surface of the roof ridges. I'm not sure if this is how you would make hay roof, but this is something I'm trying out. The biggest drawback I found was that all the tiny little flakes of polymer clay ends up everywhere, so definitely something to keep in mind if you want to attempt such a thing. Either way, it's simply a matter of peeling it out and sticking it onto the house. Now to sell the effect of the aquatic underwater life, I want to blend the water. And the best way I thought about it is to make some chimneys that would somehow protrude all the way up to the surface of the water. This makes it seem like living underwater is a bit normal. For the choice of the design of the chimney, I decided to go with metal chimneys. And some of you might be familiar with the design. I won't be telling you where I got inspiration from. Let's just say this is a practice version and I'm foreshadowing a future diorama. Leave a comment down below if you can guess what I am trying to foreshadow. Once I've got about 3 wonky chimneys, I'll simply stick it onto the house. I think the Super Sculpey Living Doll is a very good clay, although it's a bit too firm for me, and I think the Super Sculpey Medium Grey is a better fit for my taste. Speaking of taste, the Living Doll clay has a lot less smell to it, and I really like that because I have rhinitis and my nose gets itchy all the time. Even so, I'd still go to the medium grey. After giving it a proper coat of primer, I will drill some holes on the windows and the sides to make way for my LED lights to come later on. For the choice of paints, I'll give it a farmhouse appropriate color, but this time I chose to go with blue color for the doors and accents. I thought of going a bit bolder with the color instead of just sticking with flat brown gray tones. And it's a good thing to get in touch with our childish bolder self, because as we get older we tend to pick colors that are colder and monotonic, and I think it's such a tragedy. But fortunately I can craft these things to vent out my childish desires. Once all the painting is completed, I'll simply stick on some of the LED lights. For the round window on the loft, I'll be using UV resin to make it look like a window pane. I dyed the resin with a warm yellow color, but somehow it ended up looking like a nose booger. Most unfortunate. Now I also wanted to add 2 lanterns on the front of the house. To make the lanterns, I'll be using a slightly different color that I will dip into UV resin. Once I've created a shape that's good enough, I'll make the accessories using some balsa wood, to which I will give some appropriate color. And an important thing here is that I made the top and bottom slightly larger. This way, hopefully, it restricts the light to a slightly straight line instead of just blasting everywhere. Anyway, once the glue dries, I'll simply stick it onto the front of the house. And here it is, and that's not too shabby now, is it? Well, you can let me know down below. Now, in one of my videos about the secluded shelter train thing, one of you viewers, I fail my wheel safe, that's a name, suggested that I should try some rusting effect, which I think is a brilliant idea. So this time around, in my metal chimneys, I decided to give it some rusting corrosion effect. I don't know, this is my first time and I'm not really good at it, but hopefully it looks alright. You can let me know how you feel about it. Once that's dry, I'm trying to create some overgrown vegetation on top of the roof, and for that I'll be using different colors of foam and then simply stick it onto the roof. And that pretty much completes the house, so let's try to work on the base. To form the base, I'll be using a thick foam core board. I'll then stick some masking tape on the edges of the board to keep it clean because I'll be using resin and I need to stick some acrylic plates here later on. Once that's done, I'll apply a layer of PVA glue to help encourage the clay to stick to it. For the terrain, I'll be using this tree that I made for my floating island diorama. I made about 4 of these for that diorama, but I had no space to put it. But finally, we have a space for it, so I'll simply put it on here. To make the terrain, I'll be trying out a new technique. So far, I have created rocky textures using clay and painted them, but this time I'll try simply using the actual thing. For that, I bought a bunch of tiny little pebbles from an aquarium shop, of all places. I'll then pick some appropriate shapes and then simply stick it onto appropriate places. But more importantly, I'll pick up some of the tiny, flatter ones and create a cobbled pathway for the house. Now, I could have sculpted this onto the clay and painted some appropriate colors, but I thought nothing can really beat nature when it comes to looking like nature. I'll also add a fence of cobbled stone onto the side here. I'll create that by simply layering a very thick and tacky PVA glue and then simply stick some of these stones onto it. It turned out looking really good and almost like real rock because, well, they are real rocks. But let me know what you think. It does feel like cheating here. Next, to create the terrain, I'll be using this colorful little sand that I also bought from the same aquarium shop. I'll simply sprinkle it all over the terrain and then wipe off some of the excess sand. The reason I'm using sand here is I thought of making it look like a seafloor. You know, it's underwater terrain, so might as well look it a bit more aquatic. Once I have a sufficient layer, I'll simply seal it off using PVA glue. Now the other side of the terrain would be a farmland, so I'm using a different type of sand color. For the crops in the farm, I thought of going with a wheat or rice field, but unfortunately the cheap grass applicator, coupled with my inexperienced skill, created an awful mess. So I said screw it and simply sprinkled some of the wildest colors that I can find in my foam texture collection. Let's just say they are growing some underwater flowers. With the farmland completed, I thought the other side looked a bit boring and blunt, so I thought of sticking some of these brown woody foam textures to make it look like tiny little corals. And that pretty much completes the terrain. Now let's start working on the actual Halloween pumpkins. To make the pumpkin, I'll be trying out Sculpey Primo colored polymer clay for my first time. And my first impression with this clay is that, my god, it almost looks like you could eat it. Not only that, but again, this clay doesn't smell all that bad, so that's a good thing. Besides my culinary review on polymer clays, making the pumpkin should be rather straightforward. I simply roll it out into a ball and then create some crease along the sides. After that, I'll simply shove a tiny little twig on the top to make it look like the stalk of the pumpkin. After making about 10 of these, I decided to add a little bit of crease onto the top to make it look even more like pumpkins. Now it wouldn't be Halloween if there were no jack-o'-lanterns, so I'll take 2 of the larger pumpkins and then scribble out a scary face. I've seen these jack-o'-lanterns, but frankly I have no idea what they're supposed to be. There are so many different types of history around it, so if you have your own version, please let me know down below. I would really like to hear about it. Also, an interesting personal note is that I've never ever made a jack-o'-lantern in my life. So this would be the first time I've ever created a jack-o'-lantern, and I'm happy to celebrate Halloween with you all. So happy Halloweens to all of you. And as I stick these pumpkins onto the terrain, I'd like to mention a few special names. Nikki Clark, Vicky Brennan, Bunny Poncho, Shilin, Aquarium, Jessica Chams, Christina Watson, and UK Shreya. Thank you all so much for your extra support so that I can try out many new things, like this box of rotting roots, for example. Anyway, I'll take a few of these rotting roots and then try to paint it a green color. This would essentially form the vine for one of our pumpkins here. Once the paint has dried, I'll simply stick some of these leaf-looking type of things onto it. Once that's done, I'll simply stick it on the front of the diorama. With that done, I should be able to peel off the masking tape now and start working on the acrylic plates. And yes, unfortunately, it's still polystyrene sheets, the PS Lion sheet of Malaysia. But this time, these are much thicker. The reason I chose for polystyrene instead of acrylic is because acrylic costs twice as much as polystyrene, so hopefully this should be good enough. Once I've glued all the plates in place, I'll roll up a piece of paper into a conical shape. After that, I'll trim off the edges and then create a tiny little hole at the tip. This way, I can use this conical thing to guide the sand onto the corners and fill it up. Anyway, that's done, so let's start working on the resin. And this resin is also from a different company. I've been trying out different types of brands to see which one fits the bill. The difference with this resin and the other one is that it's less viscous. And it wouldn't be me if I don't provide a culinary review on this, so this resin smells like very, very sweet candy. Besides that, I have bought a paint stirring paddle here. This would hopefully make mixing the resin much easier for me and also help prevent some of the swirls that we had with the Slytherin common room diorama. Once the resin is mixed, I won't simply be pouring it onto the thing. I'll use a pipette and squeeze out little bits onto the sand. This way, the resin has enough time to seep in slowly by releasing all the trapped air. Now you might have noticed that I have not sealed any of the vegetation and flower beds there, and that's because I've done lots of experiments which I have shared in my Patreon and membership channels. Once I poured all the resin, I'll be using the same attachment that I used for the Slytherin snake and then stick the orca or the killer whale fish on it. After that, I'll simply dip it into the resin. Now there are some bubbles on top of the vegetation there and I could easily remove them, but I thought of keeping them because it makes them look like real leaves giving off oxygen gas. So how did the resin cure? Well, look for yourself. There are quite a lot of bubbles, and frankly, I was hoping that there would be some bubbles to add effect to the underwater lifestyle. But obviously, some of them are unnaturally large and odd, to say the least, so I'll try to fix them before I peel off the acrylic panels. Once the resin is free of its cage, I will create a recess on the bottom and then manage the cable on the bottom. After that, I've maxed off the side to prevent any scratches and then use some of this drilling carving thing to create some waves on the top of the water. I'll then use this thing. This is not a PVC pipe, it's actually a tape called UV resin tape. Supposedly, these are meant to be used with resin because it doesn't stick to them, but I don't know, sounds like any other tape to me. To create the additional waves, I'll be using UV resin and create them out of layers like I did with the Slytherin common room diorama. I didn't have much footage last time, but essentially I'm creating a layer after layer. If you're trying to do this, you just have to be really patient with it and create them out of very thin layers. To create some of the water waves on the surface, I'll be using this water texture and then apply it on the ridges. I don't know a lot about creating water surfaces, but I'll start off by simply trying to mimic the wind direction. Essentially, I try to keep the strokes of my brush to be in the direction of the wind and hopefully create a wavy looking thing. Once the transparent layer is completed, I'll apply a colored layer of water texture and create some of the foamy bits of the water. Once I've got a thing that I'm satisfied with, I'll peel off the bottom, mask it up, and give it a black paint. After that, it's just a matter of simply peeling off all the mask and then revealing what's underneath. And here is the diorama in all its 2.6 kilogram glory. And what can we learn from my mistakes? The first thing is that paint in resin tend to leach out. You can see them here. It almost like a ghostly fog, and the killer whale has started to obviously melt. But I think it makes it look like a cool, ghostly killer whale fish, so I'm okay with that, but definitely something to keep in mind if you are working with resin. The other thing is also with the PVA glue, because somehow it turns white again when exposed to resin. All in all, I think it's a pretty decent diorama. I wanted to improve my sculpting skills and also learn to work with much more resins, so it was definitely worthwhile for me to learn all of things, and hopefully it was worthwhile for you in watching this video. Thank you so much for watching this video. Hope you all have a happy Halloween, and cheers!